A couple things. Number one, I can't talk to anybody about anything without notes. I'm not an extemporaneous person. The second thing was when Sasha said it was a teach-in, she didn't say anything about who the audience was. So
You didn't ask?
since she has a tribe of students that follow her around the university, I thought that it was going to be, I envisioned a bunch of kids, and so I prepared my remarks for newbies and people who didn't know anything about, corporations or things like that. So I don't suspect I'm going to teach you anything, but maybe you can vent with me. I was thinking about basing my remarks around Mitt Romney's proclamation that corporations are people. And I wanted to talk about three ways that corporations are not people, or at least they're not people like you or I. And these three ways are corporate welfare, corporate cronyism, and corporate crime. First of all, it's worth thinking about what a corporation is. A corporation is an entity that is owned by shareholders. Shareholders invest in the corporation, and the manifest purpose of the corporation is to increase the price of the shares so that the shareholders increase their wealth. What that means is a corporation, say, that provides a service, is only secondarily interested in pleasing its customers. A corporation doesn't want to please its customers in the interest of, if profits go up, you don't please your customers, profits still go up, that's a good thing still. Corporations are even less interested in serving their employees. In fact, the less labor cost you have, the more profitable you are. And so it's important to think about why corporations exist and who they work for. So ask yourself, how much do you have to invest? How much do you have invested? And the extent that you are, to the extent that you are invested or not in corporations, that's the extent to which corporations are invested in you. So let me talk first about corporate welfare. The biggest recipients of handouts today are not poor people. They are corporations. Corporate welfare comes in two forms: tax breaks or outright money handouts. Now, in my opinion, sometimes it is necessary for the government to provide incentives to corporations, or it is important for the government to sort of try and steer the economy one way or another. Let me just give you two examples. Oil is a finite resource. There isn't any doubt that we are depleting existing oil fields faster than we're bringing new ones online, and we're headed for big trouble with respect to our use of energy, and everybody knows that. But right now there's no viable alternative to oil. So I think it is wholly appropriate for the government to invest in alternative energy, because profit-seeking entities are not really focused on long-term problems that are 20 years down the road. They're focused on the next quarterly report. Another example is that there are many medium-sized cities in the United States, like Cheyenne, Wyoming, Bozeman, Montana, that would not be served by any airline, would not have any flights at all because it's not profitable. And so the federal government subsidizes air travel into these cities, otherwise there wouldn't be any. Now, you can dispute whether or not these examples are good use of government funds, but I think it is pretty defensible that government should sometimes provide tax breaks and cash grants to corporations. However, there are examples that I think are pretty ridiculous. So let me give you a couple examples. A 2009 study by the Environmental Law Institute found that between 2002 and 2008, the United States subsidized the oil industry to the tune of $72 billion. So that's $72 billion. That's larger than the federal budget for the United States Department of Education. And the subsidies have remained in place despite the fact that these industries have enjoyed record profits. I'm sure we all remember what happened to the price of oil in 2007. And even though it caused incredible pain at the pump for the citizens, if you had stock in ExxonMobil or if you were, an executive for ExxonMobil, you did awesome. The subsidies have remained in place even when the Democrats, who ostensibly opposed them, had a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate, wide majority in the House, and owned the White House. So I think both parties are to blame. Here's the other example that I thought was interesting, because I'm a football fan. The second biggest market in the nation, Los Angeles, does not have a professional football team. Okay? Why doesn't Los Angeles have a professional football team? And the answer to the question is that there are teams that are interested, and there are entities that are interested in expanding to Los Angeles, but they won't expand there and they won't go there until the city of Los Angeles commits to do something for them. Anybody know what they want? They want a stadium. They want the taxpayers to build them in Los Angeles, or they've inked the deal already? Wow. There you go. And so, let me give you some figures here. The Indianapolis, the city of Indianapolis committed $720 million for a new home for the Colts. In the last 10 years, cities have spent $4.5 billion building or improving stadiums for NFL teams. In the past 20 years, 28 out of 32 NFL cities helped finance stadium construction or renovation, and that includes, right here in River City. Does anyone think that the NFL would be worse for the wear if the teams were left to cough up this money for themselves? Now, there are a number of rationales for this. One rationale is that all of the great things from having an NFL team causes, trickle down. The revenue trickles down to local merchants or restaurateurs. But my question is, why not just directly subsidize local merchants or restaurateurs? I mean, you can get a lot of bang for your buck. The other is that having an NFL team or a Major League Baseball team or an NBA franchise demonstrates that your city has arrived, and if your city has arrived, then it will attract new businesses. But, speaking as someone who has a family and speaking as someone who has siblings that have families, what about first-rate schools and top-notch libraries as a way to attract people? And, you can, for $720 million, which is what Indianapolis spent, you can improve schools a lot. You can build a lot of awesome libraries. Henry?
It's more perverse than that. The reality is, football is our religion.
Yeah.
And these stadiums are our cathedrals. And just as they built cathedrals in the Middle Ages, and every city wanted a cathedral that was more beautiful than the cathedral down the road, we're in the cathedral building business.
That's right.
And there's stadiums.
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm actually going to come back to that in a minute. I think that if I had thought of that when I was preparing these remarks, I would have put that later in my talk. The second idea is something called crony capitalism. And of course, that's when businesses cozy up to the government to get favors or special treatment. It's well known that when congressmen leave office, they often use their legislative experience to land jobs with K Street lobbying firms. So they literally become, they enter the Congress, and then when they're voted out or when they leave, they go across the street and enrich themselves lobbying other congressmen. This is why oil company subsidies persist, even though a broad majority of Americans oppose them. One classic example, right after 9/11, you remember the anthrax scares. At about the same time as the anthrax scares, there was some question about whether or not vaccines could be linked to autism. Now, it's since been demonstrated that there probably isn't a causal link, but at this time it was something that people were concerned about. And so what happened is, along with the terrorism bill to fight the anthrax, a bill was passed saying that you couldn't sue the vaccine manufacturers if your child had autism. Right? They're indemnified. Yeah.
Wow. Autistic kids are terrorists.
Right. And so my thing is like, in whose interest is that? That's in no citizen's interest. Not And you can go up and down the political spectrum, and you can go up and down the income spectrum, and that's in no one's interest. It's purely and solely, and it's interesting, like, these are the kinds of things that have true bipartisan support, and you know that an issue has bipartisan support when it happens without anybody knowing about it. So, yes.
Yeah, just what you're describing is what's known as disaster capitalism.
Right, exactly.
Naomi Klein.
Yeah. But once there's a crisis, once people are sufficiently afraid, you can pass anything. One could argue that the Bush administration was simply a puppet for the nation's largest corporate interests to engorge themselves with cash. Does anybody remember how Dick Cheney was selected to be Bush's running mate? Dick Cheney was put in charge of finding a running mate for George W. Bush, and at the end of the vetting process, he selected himself. Which is awesome, I hope that. And of course, at the time, Dick Cheney was CEO of Halliburton, and that was an oil field services company. And we often wonder, why, given that Iraq was not involved in 9/11, why did we immediately set about going to war with Iraq? And I think one could make the case that the Iraq War aligned the interests of the nation's largest corporate power brokers, the oil companies, for instance. In the run-up to the Iraq War, this is a matter of public record, Halliburton was awarded a $7 billion contract for which only Halliburton was allowed to bid. And the defense industry, what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex, was eager for something to do. So the first Gulf War had ended in Papa Bush's administration, and then we had 8 years of, relative peace. There were, Sasha will take exception to that. There were a few small skirmishes, but, nothing really big. The Balkan thing was not...
I just bombed the shit out of them there. Yeah.
And so there was nothing that would really justify expensive new major weapon systems. There was nothing that would justify... there was nothing that would really grease the wheels. Moreover, obviously, there's plenty of oil in Iraq, and so these two corporate interests that were suffused throughout the Bush administration had everything to gain and nothing to lose from attacking Iraq. And people say, well, wait a second, we don't have oil contracts with Iraq, we don't have oil shipping from Iraq to the United States, so how does that make sense? Again, corporations are worried about profits. It doesn't matter if gas prices are lower in the United States. It matters that Halliburton is developing the oil fields. It matters that American oil companies are developing these oil fields. Now, once the Iraq War was in full swing during the Bush administration, you can argue that the nation's other enormous corporate interests got jealous and they came for their share, which is why right at the end of the Bush administration, the Secretary of Treasury informed Congress that Wall Street was not given $700 billion in bailout money. The economy would collapse overnight, like a wet taco. And it speaks to your point of crisis capitalism, disaster capitalism. What I find truly interesting is this, and I'm sure it's purely coincidence that the $700 billion figure is almost, on par with what we had spent on the Iraq War up to that point. With my kids, I'm always fair that I spend the same amount on Christmas for each one, I suppose. The beauty of the bailout, to me, is that it happened so close to the election that Obama is now blamed for it. People think that it's Obama that put TARP into place. And this is, conflict sociologists talk about this as a system of privatizing profits and socializing risk. This is like, Wall Street is like a casino where you keep your winnings, but the house has to reimburse you for what you lose. And the taxpayers are the house.
I know. Repeat that.
Wall Street is like a casino where you keep your winnings, but the house has to reimburse you for what you lose. You know, I think one could argue that the entire Bush administration was a crony capitalist regime. People call it, I call it, a kleptocracy. And a kleptocracy is simply, and if you think about the Bush administration this way, it explains a lot. If you say, you know, how could people have come in with trillion-dollar surpluses and turned them into trillion-dollar deficits? That's the beauty of the Bush administration. This was not incompetent government, it was brilliant government depending on your aims. And the aim was literally to loot the treasury. The aim was to pick the middle class clean, which they have done with consummate skill. Of course, another obvious example is the idea of pay to play. When I was in graduate school in New Jersey, Christy Whitman had a $10,000 a plate, she was the governor at the time, had a $10,000 a plate dinner. You paid your $10,000, you had a picture taken with the government. And I used to ask my students why, she did this every year, and I used to ask my students, why would somebody pay $10,000 to have dinner with Christy Whitman? Does she make the world's greatest pot roast? Probably not. It's because when a piece of legislation comes up that I have a concern about, I can get on the phone and say, you know, I'd like to talk to the governor. Well, who are you? Well, I'm the chairman of XYZ Corporation, and we met the governor at the dinner where we had a table, you know, with 12 seats. And everybody knows exactly what that means. And so you pay for access. We see this more and more with the Citizens United decision. Sheldon Adelman, the casino magnate who is funding Newt Gingrich, his single $5 million donation equals the $20 donation of 250,000 ordinary citizens. So, okay. The last thing I wanted to talk about is corporate crime. And I just wanted to give you an example of the kinds of crimes that corporations commit and talk to you a little bit about why corporations aren't punished the same way for crimes as if you had committed a crime. Most of you are too young, but some of us may remember the Ford Pinto. Anybody remember the Ford Pinto? So the Ford Pinto had an awesome undocumented feature. If you hit it from behind, boom, it would rupture the gas tank, and the circuits for the taillights were not properly insulated, and it would spark. You could get spark from the circuit from the taillights, and it would cause the car to explode. And this manufacturing defect became readily apparent to Ford soon after the Pinto went on sale. And executives at Ford were alarmed. And the legal department at Ford began to tell the executives at Ford, yeah, we're going to get sued and we're going to lose. So Ford called in the accountants and said, very simply, find out how much it would cost to recall the Pinto and fix these Pintos. Then find out how much it would cost to litigate and settle all these lawsuits. Okay? This cost more. So the decision was made to just let the cars blow up. You know? Yeah, it was absolutely an actuarial analysis. Exactly.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about this is, how many people do you think went to jail?
None.
No. And why didn't they go to jail? Because no one broke the law. Plain and simple. In the United States, if crime to be committed, there has to be something called mens rea. Criminologists call it mens rea. It means the guilty mind. There has to be criminal intent. A corporation cannot have criminal intent. And that way, I'm sure Mitt Romney's happy that corporations are not people, right? An accountant didn't intend to blow people up. An accountant intended to find out how much it would cost to fix a manufacturing defect. All of these little decisions, none of which were criminal, added up to corporate for which nobody was prosecuted. By the way, the Ford Motor Corporation repeated this impressive feat with the Ford Explorer, which in the 90s, the version of the Ford Explorer had rollover problems. How Ford told dealers to rectify the problem. Underinflate the tires, right? Underinflate the tires. And the Ford Corporation was indicted in Venezuela, where they don't have the rule of mens rea. But again, in the United States, you can't really indict. Difficult to indict a corporation. So, how do we explain all of this? The first is I want to talk about two principles from the analysis of Karl Marx that helps explain it. Yeah, I know. The social science aspects of Marx. You know, the interesting thing about this is I'm not that, and Sasha will tell you, I'm not that, rabidly, these are, and the thing of it is like, what I'm saying and the things that I believe about this are hardly in dispute. I don't think you could find anybody on any side of the political spectrum that would disagree. Like, these things are manifestly true. And yet they go on with impunity. So the idea from Marx is, he asks rhetorically, who makes the law? The powerful make the laws. And who does the law serve? The people who make the law, right? The law always serves the people who make it. The other idea that other conflict sociologists have pointed out is the idea of structural Marxism. And this argues that, people say, well, wait a second, how come there's regulation on capitalism? And how come, there are all these rules? And how come there's, why do we even have an Securities and Exchange Commission? And conflict criminologists argue that this levels the playing field for corporations against each other. It's not about the citizenry, it's to make sure that corporations play fair with one another. So for instance, if you look at the whole, collapse of the economy in 2008 and you look at, all of the predatory capitalism and everything that took place, like, the only person I can think of who went to jail and all that is Bernie Madoff. Yes. Because he stole from rich people.
There's a lesson for you.
The Enron guy.
Enron went to jail. And so Enron is a beautiful example because they wanted to privatize utilities. And when they privatized utilities, obviously, you have an incentive for utility rates to go up. And so what Enron would do would say, hey, take that power plant offline for maintenance, which would then, raise power rates. So Ken Lay went to jail. Jeff Skilling went to jail. Like, people go to jail, but how egregious does it have to be before you go to jail?
Yeah, didn't one of them lose all their money too?
Yeah. Oh, which one committed suicide? One of the Enron guys. Yeah. So, and then there was the Bernard Evers went to jail too.
Fastow did too.
And Fastow. So the last example, the last idea from Marx, or the second idea from Marx, is Marx's notion that the ideas of the ruling class become the ruling ideas, and that is that ordinary citizens buy into the system. That this just seeps into our consciousness, and this is just not a big deal because people see that as the way things are done. I think Henry's comment about NFL stadiums as Temple's a classic example of this, because it would not be hard to line up the taxpayers to consent to tax themselves to build a stadium that, once built, they would not be afforded to enter to watch a game. And there just isn't any other way to explain it other than football's our religion. And does anybody know what Marx called religion? This is an educated band. For the record, let me just say, I'm a proponent of free enterprise. I think free enterprise is a good thing. I don't think, from my perspective, I don't think there's anything morally incorrect about profit. But let me tell you who I think is adamantly opposed to free markets and free corporations. They're not interested in it. Okay, thanks for venting with me. Yes.
Bring up one of the most egregious examples of corporate welfare, and that's the pharmaceutical industry,
Yes.
which the government pays for their research and development, pays them outright, and then subsidizes the product that is sold here for an enormous amount of money, which could be purchased in Canada or in Europe for a minuscule.
Which is why
amount.
the most hilarious thing I've ever heard is that Obama socialized medicine.
Right.
That is, socialized medicine by handing, the drug companies and the insurance companies the most fantastic plans that they can imagine. The individual mandate requires everybody to buy their shitty product. It's amazing.
I want to add to that, though, Emily, and that because I worked in research and development for a little bit, and I was reading a white paper, and I don't know what all the white paper entails, but it's like a very authoritative document, and it was the state of research and development in the United States. And basically what it was saying was that corporations no longer wanted to invest any money in R&D. They wanted to shift it to the government. It wasn't a government-funded program, which they, of course, the other was anything that's not profitable, that just goes by the wayside.
Alrighty, thank you.
Can I make one more comment? You were talking about Marx and some of his statements. I saw there was a banner on the internet and it said Marx was right. And I started, you know what I'm talking about?
Asterisk. Yeah.
I started doing some research, and what it was saying was that Marx made a prediction. And he said that capitalism would destroy itself if left to its own devices. And this is exactly what we're seeing with the economic collapse. If nobody was watching or nobody was holding them accountable, look for, it's not just the United States, it's worldwide. These corporations have plunged hundreds of millions of people into dire poverty. And like you say, nobody's gone to jail.
I think that's the whole sales pitch, though, to kind of deflect away from single payer. With the whole Obamacare equals socialism thing, it's to give the public the perception that we're actually hitting back when we're not. I mean, look at here in the state of Florida, there's a state law that requires that everybody has auto insurance. That's all Obamacare really is. It's just a requirement that health insurance privately.
The second flare of that argument is it's all right for states to do it. It's not all right for the
Right.
federal government.
That's an extraordinarily convenient argument. We'll see how that flies in the general election.
So I have a question. I'm the leftist and the activist in the department, and you're the radical centrist, right? Which in sociology department is pretty much as far right as it goes. So how do you see this stopped or reversed? Because to me, going back to unregulated capitalism and free market wouldn't be much of a solution either. It would go the way Marx predicted it. Now
Right.
we have just more centralization and more globalization, and it's really not even the 1%, but 0.1% that has the control of most of the things. So what do you see as
first of all, the answer to that question is really I'm sort of becoming a political realist. I have not that much hope left.
say what you want about the
Yeah. Probably the only thing that could possibly happen would be to reform election law, campaign finance law, so that actual issues are presented to the citizenry and restore sort of the ballot box integrity, because right now it's just an absolute joke. In some respects, I don't blame people for being swayed by these stupid 30-second ads because they're busy and they have their lives or whatever. But I mean, you know, you could just outright buy elections now. There's absolutely no, you know, the citizens have essentially no voice, and it's beyond having no voice. They don't even know, you know, what the issues are, because the real issues aren't even being presented. I mean, no politician can stand up and sort of talk about what's really going on, because, you know, that politician won't get any money. So, you know, I think that one of the smartest things that people can do is attempt to restore democracy to elections. I would be a fan of publicly funded elections. That's what I would do. The other thing is, you know, and you don't, this doesn't count for you, I'm not talking about you, but like, there's plenty of blame to go around. You know, your fellow citizens are, you know, awfully complacent. They're awfully ignorant.
Yeah. They occupy the town.
Yeah, and in some respects, you know, if you know, how are we able to sort of see through all of this crap, and they're not able to see through all of this crap? Well, they're obviously not interested in looking. So, you know, I have no idea what to do about, you know, a large swath of the citizenry that gets the kind of government that they deserve. Or gets the kind of government that they want. Yeah, exactly.
But that's, I mean, you know, in the spirit of Marxist theory, they are created into consumers who care nothing but you know, when do I get the new TV?
Exactly.
And these kinds of things. Talking politics is just bad manners in this country, right? You don't talk politics. And if you do, oh, you're weird, right? And that's the part of dominant ideology. How do you avoid people being radical? Well, you make sure they spend their time shopping and not thinking. Okay.
What I think happens, you develop a system in which the top 1% extracts all the resources to themselves. Everyone is left worse off. And what you tell everyone else is, look out, affirmative action took your job, or the Mexicans took your job.
Yeah, exactly, that's true.
Or something else.
That's part
but
of
anybody who believes that is a
Lots
dummy.
of people believe that.
I know, but I mean, you can't, I mean, tell me, you know, if you are so incurious about the world that you don't even look into these things. I mean, it's just, how can you not blame people in part for believing such horseshit?
We've got a movement called the Tea Party. There's just a fraction of those who believe these things.
Yeah.
I was talking yesterday at a business school. They had like international business research conference. I think they wanted like someone weird there, so they invited me.
Mission accomplished.
I was really kind of like an insect there, and they were talking about, you know, how great globalization is, and what happens when you import jobs and whatnot, and you know, there's a room full of PhD in the economics, and lots of them have just this cost-benefit analysis without any insight or any interest as to how does that relate into political inequalities or other social inequalities. It's just not on the agenda for that particular group. And those are very educated people, very smart. And in fact, we finished conversation with the chair of the economics department saying, yeah, well, if this inequality thing continues, we're going to have Marxist thing on hand, because masses have nothing to lose, really.
Well, you can't, when you destroy your customer base, it's kind of hard to sell anything.
But, you know, look at what happened. Most people that I've talked to, if I say, well, do you know what derivatives are? And they say, yeah, but then I really know that deep down they don't know, because if they know what happened with credit default swaps and derivatives, then they'd understand why, excuse the expression, why all the banks are shitting in their pants when they hear about Greece about ready to go under. Because
the first domino.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
But when I try and explain something like that, they don't want to hear it. They just don't.
Have you watched Capitalism: A Love Story?
Yes.
when Michael Moore is asking all these Harvard professors
explain
what
it.
derivatives are, and they cannot explain it because the whole thing is devised in such a way as to be incomprehensible, so people don't engage with it.
Yeah, but I'll say one thing about that, Sasha, is YouTube is your friend. If you go to YouTube, I'm serious, there are some very good explanations of what is simplified, and it's not hard to understand. It was a scam.
Well,
That was a good film. Yep.
I'd like to address the matter of corporate growth being the objective of corporations. In my estimation, corporate growth is finite because the only way corporations can grow is either to put some other corporation out of business or to absorb them.
Yes.
It's finite. There's just so much on this earth, and that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. We, where Sasha and I teach, the administration has something called the Continuous Improvement Plan, where every year we're supposed to show continuous improvement plan. I'm always wondering, like, what happens when we reach perfection? Right? Then there'll be no more. The whole model of endless economic growth assumes infinite resources. And this is when you think about it. When you look at the resources that make this world run and the kind of scarcity that they have, you can see why, the rich are so greedy. It's not just greed. Like, they're protecting their wealth. They're not stupid. They know what's coming. And that's why, they're so adamant about not raising our taxes this much, because it's going to take every penny they have to tough it out. When, you think about, my pet peeve is oil, and I follow the oil industry carefully. 50 years ago, you could stick a straw in the ground in Saudi Arabia and oil would come bubbling out. Now, in Saudi Arabia, they're doing deep water drilling off the coast of Saudi Arabia into a mile of water. Like, why is Saudi Arabia doing deep water drilling? It's because their oil fields are depleting. Everybody's oil fields are depleting. Like, imagine a tree that is filled with fruit. You walk up to the tree. The first thing you're going to do is pick the ripe, low-hanging fruit. Well, once the ripe, low-hanging fruit is gone, then what are you going to do? You can either climb the tree for ripe fruit, or you can pick low-hanging sour fruit. Once the low-hanging sour fruit is gone, once the ripe fruit at the top of the tree is gone, all you have are sour apples at the top of the tree. And that's why you have, oil companies squeezing oil out of sand in Canada. Yeah, that's, this is it. We are, we're scraping the bong, boys and girls. That's,
I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't want to dominate the conversation. I do have a lot to say. But, you're saying that we're running out of oil. But there's other people that are saying, no, this oil is the theory that oil is produced from decaying plant life is old theory that it's
abiogenesis, they call it. They're idiots. Those are the same people who think the Earth is 6,000 years old.
but what they're finding now is that it's constantly being regenerated, and we are not. Look at who the biggest. Some of the biggest oil producers now are the Russians, and they have found techniques where a U.S. company will drill 10 oil wells.
Right.
3 of them will be productive. The Russians have found a way for every 10 they drill, 6 of them are productive, and they found oil in places that the American companies said we would never find.
They're getting pretty inventive about finding oil, but they're always finding it under deep water or under permafrost that's conveniently melting and things like that. Since 2000, there has been more oil used than oil discovered. I was horrified to hear the Republicans chanting "Drill, baby, drill" at the 2008 convention because, there might be a lot of oil in the continental shelf, but I don't know any petroleum geologist anywhere in the world that thinks that there's enough there that we're going to be like energy independent and that we're going to sustain the kind of energy use that we have with the resources that we have. There's just no possible way. I mean, have you ever heard of peak oil or read about peak oil?
It's the technology of the past. It's the technology of the past.
Yeah, but they were saying back in the 70s that we had reached peak oil. Have you listened?
The problem is the timing. You know, it doesn't matter whether they hit peak oil at 2015 or 2020 or 2035, and maybe it won't. See, one of the things that happened to my life is that, you know, I used to worry about these things, but I didn't worry too much. I mean, people would say things that were happening with global warming, and I'd say, you know, by the time global warming is really bad, I'll be dead anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. And then I had kids, and the event horizon of my worries moved 70 years into the future. It was the worst existential pain I've ever felt, right? I would like some oil to be in the ground. You know, I would like for my son to have some energy resources, you know, for my grandchildren to have some energy resources. So, you know, yeah, they've been wrong about the predictions of peak oil, but one thing they haven't been wrong about is that the United States oil production peaked in the mid-70s, and it has never risen to the level. I don't care what kind of technology you use in North Dakota, or if you go to ANWR, or the kinds of things they're doing in Alaska. The downside slope hasn't been as pronounced as people have thought, but we've never reached the peak. You realize there was a time in the 1970s when the United States produced more oil than Saudi Arabia does now. Yep. What did we do? We pissed it away like beer at a frat party.
With demand from India, China.
Oh yeah.
It's just not sustainable.
Was BP ever fined for all the oil they dumped in the Gulf?
I think they're about to settle. Did I hear they were working on a settlement?
It was supposed to be $4,200 a barrel.
Well, what's the current thoughts on the fracking business?
You know, I don't know much about that.
I know a fair amount.
Because I've heard both. I mean, I hear one person, oh, they're right, then I hear somebody else, oh, maybe.
Well, essentially what the technique is in the old days, they would put wells straight down, bring the gas in. They have depleted those wells, those easy to get at wells, and they're now going down below the shale formations using this fracking technique that creates these lateral formations miles and miles and miles.
Yeah, that was they actually had a really good diagram in like USA Today one time on the fracking. I kept it on my wall for a while. But I mean, I wonder what the adverse effects, I mean, are there going to be, I mean, some people talk about it collapses and it'll cause earthquakes, and I mean, I'm hearing all kinds of...
Groundwater, is it?
The groundwater with the salt and stuff.
There are basically two adverse effects. The first adverse effect is they put all kinds of chemicals in the water that they flush down, some of which are cancerous and cause other problems. It's not clear how that's gotten rid of, first of all. Second, all of that comes up with the oil. And you've got disposal problems associated with it. Third, you get ruptures in the ground and the earth through all this. And so oil begins to contaminate wells that other people have that aren't involved in the process.
Like to sing gas.
That is real.
And that has happened in many, many homes in Pennsylvania. I have a friend who is a physician in upstate New York that's the next area that's going to get fracking. And the community he is living in is receiving in their solid waste treatment place materials from Pennsylvania that are in this fracking. He says the cancer rates among workers in the waste treatment facility in his community, and they haven't even gotten
It just doesn't sound good. You know what I mean? It doesn't sound like a good idea.
Yeah, they should change the name.
Yeah.
Call it.
Right at the beginning.
Yeah. Daffodil trimming.
Well, it's normally hydraulic fracture.
Yeah.
And when you bring into the frantic race for profits, then it brings a healthy amount of skepticism for the likes of us.
Yeah, my plus was the T. Boone Pickens, you know who I'm talking about, that's his name, T. Boone Pickens, he's an oil man. But the way he was talking about it, he had it all explained, and it was going to be easy and beautiful, and they were going to clean it all up, and like you said, with the salt water.
He started off as a windman.
Right.
Yeah, that's what...
and then all of a sudden he flipped.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's all you hear from him.
But I'll tell you one thing that
The other
Boone
thing
Pickens.
is earthquakes.
Seismic activity.
There's a lot of seismic activities associated in these areas where fracking does occur.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering about.
But think, why would Boone Pickens, the oil man, be so desperate to get out of oil?
Yeah.